My name is George Griffin. You will see my photograph is several years ago. But we all do that, don't we? I'm very pleased to introduce this meeting, albeit briefly. Regenerative medicine, I think, is the wrong term. And we've had there'll be a big full-day meeting tomorrow. Regenerative medicine to some people means exercise and regeneration. What we are talking about is fundamental cell-based therapy and the transfer of cells for therapeutic purposes. And that will become very apparent, of course, during the day. This morning, I met with Martin Seychelles, one of the deputy directors of Santé in the Commission, and we talked about the challenges for the Commission in the next 5 years and the areas that they wish to pursue in health. Had a very, very good meeting, and the role of academies, the role of universities in advising the EU. And it's very interesting. The same areas which we were all thinking about in academe are the ones which, quite independently, the EU Santé have picked up. So that was very encouraging and very refreshing. Now, the forum is something which has developed in FEAM, the Federation of European Academies of Medicine, as a vehicle for joining like-minded people from different disciplines. They are from industry, they're from academe, they are from the patient population. And that is very important. So it's a very diverse field and a very important field to bring together. And we have about 4 meetings a year, and probably will increase this. And the choice of the topics is generated by the members of the forum. So if there's a particular area which someone who's a member of the forum really wishes to have addressed, they contact Elisa. Elisa is there, who is one of the principal organisers of the meeting. And then we organise the science and the clinical medicine behind that. So you are all very welcome today. And you're all here because you are passionate about and wish to see regenerative medicine used. Now, I have one conflict of interest. My son is a speaker.
I wasn't going to mention it, George.
Now that tells you one of two things. Either I'm much older than I look, or my son is much younger than he looks, or a combination of the two, of course. But I have to declare that, and he will explain why he's been involved and what he's going to talk about. So welcome to the meeting. We're all very excited about this. Tomorrow we have a full-day meeting, which is a joint meeting of ESAC and FEAM, and this will be looking in considerable detail at the biology of regenerative medicine. So this is the start of a day and a half of really, really good meeting, and I welcome Robin and Volker from ESAC. So I hand over now to Jackie. Jackie is going to convene the meeting for us, and then I will conclude after the discussion. Jackie.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, George. So, a very warm welcome as well from me to this workshop on regenerative medicine. We take that under advisement, George, as scientific advances and the regulatory framework in Europe. And thank you to FEAM for organising this event on such an important topic. As George said, my name is Jackie Davis, and I will moderate our discussions. And I have one aim, which is to make sure that not only do we hear from our wonderful and expert panels, I'll tell you a bit more about them in a moment, but also we hear from all of you. So I will be coming out amongst you, Oprah Winfrey style, a little bit later on with the microphone, to take your comments and questions. If you would like to share with the outside world some of the things you're hearing in here, And please do, let's get the regenerative medicine message out. Please use the Twitter hashtag stem cells. If you would like to ask a question in this room, can I ask, however, that you do it in the very old-fashioned way? Raise your hand and I will come to you with the microphone. It's a workshop. We want to have a very interactive, very dynamic session. Our two panels, and you saw the slide a little bit earlier, the first one is on policy and ethics, and the second is on science. We're going to hear a little bit about the state of the art in the science, where we are headed. In the first one, the policy and ethics, I've asked our panels to make short opening remarks. They're going to give us some opening thoughts on how they see the challenges and the opportunities in this area in just 5 minutes each. And then we'll have a very interactive discussion, first with me asking them some questions, and also then I'll bring you in the second panel, because we want to hear about the science, different format, longer presentations, but still time at the end for you to ask questions, make comments, share your thoughts. To that end, speakers on both panels, can I please ask you to stick to the times that have been allocated for those presentations or opening remarks, and to forgive me if I gently, but also somewhat firmly, remind you when your time is up. So that is it for housekeeping. Let us turn to our policy and ethics session. Joining me here in the room, we have a little technical challenge this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to go over here so one of our speakers can see me. Patrick, one of our speakers, as you will see, is joining us by remote. We hope it's going to work. We've tested it. We're going to give it our best shot, but we didn't want to lose him when he discovered that he couldn't come to Brussels this afternoon at the last minute, for reasons which will become apparent. But let me introduce our other speakers, and as I do, please come and join me on the stage. His name on your program is Isidorius, but he prefers to be called Dorian. Dorian Karatsas, who is head of the Ethics and Research Integrity Sector in the Directorate General for Research and Innovation in the European Commission. Joining us by remote is Patrick Sellis, who is head of the Scientific Secretariat in the Committee for Advanced Therapies in the European Medicines Agency. So obviously very crucial, the role of the EMA in all of this. So Patrick, thank you very much for joining us by remote. Sheila Lana, I checked the first name and not the second one, but got it right. Head of International Campaigns and Policy at Sense About Science, which from my research, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, Sheila, is an independent campaigning charity that challenges the misrepresentation of science in the public debate and public discourse. So very good to have you with us. And last but not least, Professor Giulio Cossu, who is chair in regenerative medicine in the Division of Cell Matrix Biology and Regenerative Medicine at the University of Manchester. So, plan is 5 minutes opening remarks, each of them. Then I'm going to have a little chat with Patrick, following up on what he has said and giving him a chance to react to what he's heard from the other panelists. Then we'll have a bit of debate among ourselves. Then I'll involve all of you. Then we'll have another chat with Patrick later on. We'll see how it all works beautifully, organically. So Dorian, thank you so much for being here with us today. And would you kick us off, please, with your opening thoughts in terms of the policy and the ethical challenge?
Yes, I will do so, but in a good Commission official fashion, I will ask you for your help. I Googled ethics in your areas, and it's very hard to find new publications. A lot of the things that are on the internet, and I have not gone to the official medical websites, but because you have access to almost everything, the good publications come first. I was surprised to find out, to re-educate myself, that a lot of the recent publications in ethics and research and ethics and this area, well, the latest was 2015, and that was 17, and that was the Newfield Council report. And the Newfield Council report, very frequently, as is the case with a lot of those ethics advisory papers, is up there. It's very high, as far as principles, as far as opportunities, as far as how we can change the world and how we are doing, you are doing so. I come from an area where I want to take those principles from up there and do them bench operation procedures. How to inform our research teams, how to inform our researchers when they compile proposals for funding in the European Union to move from the high-level principles to what actually they need to do to go through, and I know that is a terrible expression, research ethics committees. We all know that is a big challenge, even in medicine. And data protection, reuse of data, transfer of data, are all in our agendas and are all challenges that we do not have very, very clear answers. For me, it's an opportunity, it's not a hurdle, but a lot of the researchers, and they voice it, see it as a problem. Now, in ethics, what we are trying to do is work on the best available advice in this area. Since we do not have it, and since it's not readily available, or we do not have access to it, one of the issues that I would like to bring on the table for FEAM would be to prepare such advice that can be used by all researchers. And it's not only a nice word that I'm saying. If you prepare it, we will use it. You remember the old Hollywood movie, If You Build It, They Will Come? Well, if you prepare such an advice from an authoritative body as you, or most of you, I think most of you come from there, we can make it into a reference document for the framework program in order for our research teams to consult and do as it is necessary without getting lost in their own searches for the most frequent or the most recent or the most appropriate advice. Now, you know about human embryonic stem cells. I'm not going to go in there. This is one of the few areas that we have very good regulatory framework, at least in the framework program, and we operate with this, and this will remain to be the case in Horizon Europe. What we also need is training of young researchers, experts, that we use in our ethics review. I couldn't think of a better, more authoritative body than you to come and help us train those young researchers that we are using as ethics experts. We cannot assume, even in medicine, that this knowledge is public knowledge, is widely shared and practiced. Of course, we know that all researchers in big institutions or hospitals have to go through an ethics review. And of course, we know that the training that they get is hands-on training. So we want to kind of be ahead of the competition and ask you to help us to train researchers in that area in order to be more effective ethics reviewers, not to create a mechanism where ethics is seen as a red tape mechanism, that ethics is seen as an enabler. And we know what we are talking about because we talk about basically an area which is, everything is emerging, right? Everything is emerging. Also, we want to ask you to provide experts. Suggest to the European Commission, to ethics, people that are knowledgeable in the field, that have hands-on experience both on the science but also on the ethics issues, because this combination should not be forgotten, that we can use in order to review the proposals that come from your academies, from your participants in funding from the European Union. And third and not least, because we do work in ethics and we fund proposals in ethics, we have a major call that is coming up, which is about the ethics of organoids. Why did we pick up that theme, the organoids issue? Because we think that this is a disruptive technology, a disruptive innovation. It will create a discussion both at the scientific and social level that might need some kind of refocusing of the ethics issues concerning even how we consider our own self, our autonomy, basic issues in ethics. So there I am, basically 4 requests.
Okay, so he started by giving you your homework. We'll come back on how you see some of those issues where you want their input a little bit later on. But Patrick, can I turn to you, and if you can hear me and if we can hear you, your opening thoughts, if you would, please. Hang on, we're going to just make sure your mic is unmuted. Okay, let's try.
Yeah, yes. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. So my perspective would be the one from a regulatory authority, in this case, European Medicines Agency. and I will give you some of our insights on the challenges we see to bring advanced therapy medicinal products with what's called regenerative medicines in the US from the bench to the market and then to the patient. Now, I am talking here about advanced therapy products, and acronym is ATMP, so I probably use that one. Now, these include gene therapies and those cell products where the cells are substantially manipulated or used for a different essential function. So, for example, bone marrow put directly in the heart would be in Europe considered an ATMP, so a medicine. Now, this is not covering the entire field of cellular therapies, because some of them will, of course, be outside of the ATMP framework. Now, for those that are considered medicines, like any other medicines, the developer will have to show that this product is made consistently to a controlled quality, and that efficacy outweighs any of the potential risks. And to demonstrate such a benefit-risk profile, we normally expect clinical trials, controlled clinical trials. The result is a marketing authorization or an approval, allowing this product to be put on the market in the EU. Now, for advanced therapy medicinal products, it was already long time requirements, like for a chemical product, cannot for 10 years. There is specific legislation for ATMPs.
Patrick, can you hear me? We just lost you there for
I can, yes.
On that last part. If you could try and repeat that bit again. Sorry, about the last 30 seconds.
Okay, no problem. So, for advanced therapy medicinal products, they will be approved like any other medicine. So, and this implies that the developer demonstrates that he can make the product to a consistent, controlled quality, and he has to show via clinical trials that the efficacy of the product outweighs any potential risks. Now, for ATMPs, it has been acknowledged that requirements are not the same as for a chemical product, and therefore legislation is in place for over 10 years for the approval of such a product. Now, an additional novelty is that these products are most of the times originating the...
Sorry, we're losing you again. I don't know if there's anything we can do about this.
Developed by Academies. It's a pity.
Yes, it's a little frustrating. Try again.
Okay, let me just talk a bit about the challenges we have seen.
Yeah.
So the first thing is that for these products, you cannot expect the large clinical trials or a lot of patients treated. Very often they are made for very rare diseases or they require surgery. So it will not be possible to have large trials. So most of our products that we have approved have less than 100 patients in the trials. Also, it's not always possible, and it's often not the case that we have randomized controlled trials for these products. So the problem of all this is that the level of uncertainty that we have to accept at the time of approval is larger than for other medicines. And therefore it's very important that high quality evidence is collected from each patient treated, and that there is a structured way of collecting data after approval to reduce the uncertainty of this product. Can you still hear me okay?
Yep, absolutely fine at the moment.
Okay, let's go a little bit further. So as the large trials are not there, it's very important that all clinical data obtained even in early trials are well collected. So, of course, this implies that the product use, even in early development, is well characterized. So the developers are very much should take that into account, that for these products, every patient counts, and that they have to think early in development already about what and the usefulness of all the data they will obtain with their product. Now, with regards to post-authorization requirements, here, so far, all ATMPs that we have approved have specific post-approval commitments to provide additional safety and or efficacy information. And that can be either from trials, from registries, or from the normal clinical use.
Hang on, we just lost you again for a moment here.
And how they can, taking it again. So, with regards to post-authorization requirements, developers should also start thinking early on how they can identify, control, and address side effects and confirm efficacy after the.
Now we lost you again there, sorry. Sorry, Patrick, at the moment I can't hear you.
The product is, and that will later. Okay, let's.
Sorry.
Can you hear me again?
We lost you really.
Sorry, it's a bit of a challenge.
I know. We're doing our best, but I think we're getting some very important central points through for our discussion. So thank you for persevering. We appreciate it. Try again. Let's see how we get on for the next couple of minutes. Go on, if you can. He's frozen. Are you frozen, Patrick?
I can't hear you anymore. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but you're not moving. That's fine. We can hear you.
I'm not, but seemingly system seems to be frozen. So can you hear me again?
Don't worry, we can hear you. What it tells me is that it's a slow internet connection, which is why we're having a bit of a struggle. But at the moment, we can hear you even when you freeze. So let's plow on for a couple of minutes.
Okay.
We'll give up if we have to, but I don't want to give up unless I have to. Okay.
Slow connection. Yeah.
Sorry about this, everyone.
Okay. So last point I want to make. Is an issue where probably we don't have full control, but it's a very important one. And this is namely that the approval of a product by us does not automatically mean that the product will be available to patients. And this has to do with the reimbursement conditions. So in Europe, each member state has its own place, own system. It has the value of a new medicine that enters the market and to attach a reimbursement or payment to that one. And these criteria, both first the authorities responsible for the reimbursement are different from the ones for approval of the product, and the criteria for effectiveness assessment are also different from those for assessing the benefit risk for approval. Now, ATMPs are extremely difficult because they do not fit in the normal scheme.
Hang on a second, I'm going to...
So they are referring, for example, to the Zolgensma.
Hang on, we're just going to try something here. So here, just do that. Can you still hear me, Patrick? You can't see me, but can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, we're trying this because we're hoping that without the images it might work better.
That's my idea.
Perhaps I do the same. So can you hear me still?
Yeah, we hear you better. We're hoping that that's less demanding on the system. So
I switched off my monitor as well, so probably then we use less bandwidth.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so just saying that ATMPs are more tricky for the reimbursement bodies to get grips of, because they are, first of all, very expensive, and I'm referring to the Zolgensma Novartis product for the treatment of spinal muscular atrophy that has a price tag of over $2 million US dollars. And then also, this type of products, ATMPs, are not just to treat the disease, but the aim is to cure a patient with a single administration. The fact that limited data at the... Are you missing me again?
Yep, no, I can hear you. No, we've lost you.
Okay, so the limited amount of data at approval
Unfortunately,
and
Patrick,
certainty about long-term effects and or safety.
Okay, Patrick, I'm afraid we're losing you again every third word. I think we're going to have to hold it there just for a moment. I mean, what I'm picking up from you very clearly, and we had, because we were talking at the beginning about that getting from lab to market to patients. As you say, there is the research challenge in relation to clinical trials, and that issue of we don't have the quantity, so we have to ensure we have the quality, if I'm summing you up correctly. And then when we talk about going from market to patient, other challenges there relating to reimbursement models and so on. So some key issues. I'd like if we can have one more go a little bit later on, but I'll bring in the other speakers first now, if I might. Just to ask you in terms of where we have come since the action plan of 2017, which I know was intended to make the authorization process more streamlined and so on, how you see the progress we've made and where we can build on that. But thank you for now. Bear with us if you can. And I'd like at this point to bring in Sheila Lana, who, as I said, is from Sense About Science. Sheila, your opening thoughts in terms of the policy and the ethics, that balance of challenge and opportunity that
Thanks,
we have.
Jackie. Thank you very much. And thank you to the forum and to Lisa for the invitation to come and speak to this really interesting meeting today, which what looks like a very, very interesting set of topics and audience. As Jackie said, I work at Sense About Science, which is the London and Dublin-based charity which campaigns around the use and misuse of evidence in public life. We work in all sorts of different ways, but we work with researchers and research organisations to help them effectively communicate and engage with policymakers and the public around their research and evidence more broadly. And all our work is about equipping the public to make sense of science and evidence. Our remit is to and for the public. So that's the perspective I'm speaking at from today, the public perception and public perspective. So we at Sense About Science have about 17 years of experience helping members of the public navigate discussions and claims about research and science and evidence. We work with groups like People and the charities and support groups of people with chronic conditions, people for whom maybe there isn't a cure in the near future in sight, who maybe their current treatments aren't providing much relief, people who, in a nutshell, who are vulnerable to the appeal of alternative and unproven treatments. So we work with them to help those people and their families make sense of reports that they are often bombarded with day in and day out about medical breakthroughs and wonder drugs and miracle cures, things which offer miracles for which the evidence is sometimes lacking or unreliable. So our work helping those people, again, is all around equipping them with the tools of scientific reasoning so that they can scrutinize and question claims for themselves. Those people were just the kind of people that were identified in Giulio Cosu's and the Lancet Stem Cell Commission report in 2017. That piece of work identified that there's a lot of optimism and excitement about the potentials of regenerative medicine broadly across the public, while at the same time there was only a relatively small number of actual clinical success stories. So that piece of work identified there was a gap between people's expectations of regenerative medicine and the reality. And there was a discussion there that this is what leaves people vulnerable to misunderstanding and vulnerable to being taken advantage of by unscrupulous people who take advantage of that gap in understanding and in expectation. There is one area in particular where the experts on that commission and I've got a conflict of interest here maybe, because one of them was my boss, Tracy Brown from Sense About Science. One area in particular they identified was there's a particular worry around clinical trials of experimental therapies. The issue there was that unscrupulous operators were using the cover of running a clinical trial and having all the trappings that goes along with running a clinical trial, like having the trial registered on a government-run clinical trial register or database, to make it seem like this was a good science-based clinical trial that had been approved by some authority somewhere, when that was not necessarily the case. So patients were understandably looking at these clinical trials, which were registered on clinicaltrials.gov, the FDA's clinical trial register, and thinking, well, this must be science-based, this must be approved by someone, therefore the therapy must be safe, and there must be some big hope and potential here, when maybe there wasn't. We also saw that some of these operators were asking were using clinical trials as a way to offer directly to patients and the public unproven and unlicensed therapies. So they would have been able to get elsewhere, often asking people to pay to join the clinical trial and to pay to use the therapy as well. So Sense About Science decided to take forward the recommendation that was in the Lancet Stem Cell Commission around this, of exploring the idea of setting up a new database or register somewhere of only regenerative medicine clinical trials that had some sort of a standard of robustness or scientific and ethical integrity to it, only allowed good clinical trials to be registered on it. So we explored that a bit. We brought together a bunch of the patients and people who I described earlier and explored with them their responses to such a website, but also more broadly tried to see where they were coming from when they were navigating things like invitations to join a clinical trial or searching for information on new therapies. I can tell you a whole lot more detail about this in the discussion, but maybe just one or 2 points that I'll put to you right now is that obviously these people were very interested in hearing about new and potential therapies and treatments for their conditions. They identified a certain number of indicators which for them would indicate trustworthiness of a clinical trial and a new therapy, including that they looked at the country that this clinical trial was being run in and where the trial was happening and where the therapy was coming from, and would decide whether they thought there was going to be strong research regulation in that country or not, and also whether the clinical trial was being run by an institution that they had previously heard of. So they were their indications of trustworthiness. But we also learned that what was really important for them was discussions around the status of the evidence. They wanted to know what was already known about this treatment, what tests had been done, what were other scientists saying about this. So this was all around the status of evidence around these pieces of research. It was really interesting. So from that piece of research, which we did with the patients, we have a number of recommendations for policymakers.
Can we come back to the recommendations a little bit later on?
We can.
Because I'd like to identify those challenges first and then to
Absolutely.
What we talk about.
Let's do it.
So hold that thought, if you would, just for a little while, Sheila. Julio, complete the picture for us. You mentioned the Stem Cell Commission report Julia was involved in. She did. You were involved in. How do you see the challenge and that balance, really? Because we're talking here about a lot of opportunities, huge potential benefits, but huge challenges as well. And getting that right is the center of what we're talking about.
Okay, let me touch on a few points that could be then taken up by the general discussion. One point that Dorian raised about ethics to start with, it's extremely important. But I would like to add that regenerative medicine has a slightly, on top of what we have heard that is unquestionable, there are additional and specific ethical problems related to stem cell and regenerative medicine. And the things that come to my mind first are, the first one is that the costs are very high. We have heard that, right? Now, one important distinguo that should be made is that if it's a one-in-a-lifetime treatment that cures that patient, returns to a normal life, and bears no additional cost, or without going to the stem cell clinic somewhere in the world, more than respectable companies try clinical trials that produce a modest result. But still, they charge a very high cost that is justified by the cost of producing that medicinal product. However, they do not cure. I can make the case of oligonucleotides for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which I have followed very closely. There is a benefit for the patient, but that benefit is just delaying of a little bit the progress of the disease. However, the cost that NICE had to pay it was and is still very high, and adds up to all the other costs of assistance of this patient that remain unchanged. And obviously this brings to the second point. A company needs to survive and survives only if the product is successful. As we say in Italy, this is a little like asking to the winemaker if the wine is good, right? And obviously, you get an indication, and there is a rationale. If you get further funds, if you get marketing approval, then you can develop a better generation, and the next generation will be better. If you cut that, it's game over. However, you know, we haven't seen, for example, there are new generation of oligonucleotides that are being developed that promise to be much more efficacious and so could be reach a concentration in the muscle that currently is not. And the third point, which is completely different about ethics, is about eligibility of patients. What when there are more patients willing to enter a trial than the available, how you, once you have excluded clinical criteria, which are obvious, then there is a problem of choosing. That's for the ethics. The last thing I want to say is that Patrick was mentioning first, maybe you don't know, Patrick has been my boss for a short period when I was working at the Committee for Advanced Therapy. It's important that scientists, clinicians, and regulators interact as soon as possible. So now, for example, we're running a clinical trial in Manchester, and we interacted immediately with MHRA, and the interaction was great because we were advised, we had only constructive criticism. Problem was when we submitted the application, it went to a different person because, in this large organization, the same person not necessarily follows, who was unaware and essentially raised criticism that she would have not raised if she had been following all the track of the... And so these are things that probably need still to be optimized. And I think for the time being, and my last obsession is that stem cell clinics are becoming more and more sophisticated. It's no longer the, stem cell cure all the disease, come to us, give us 30,000, and we cure any disease. It's much more complicated than that. Now there are clinicians who write protocols that seem respectable, not worse than that of many others. They carry on their trials in California. There is a rationale. The results are modest and published in a leading journal. So now you tell me how we can tell apart, and to me the only thing comes to my mind, if patients pay or don't pay, is the only thing we have in the hands to say, but obviously this I think is for discussion.
Okay, lots to talk about, thank you very much. And so we're adding to our things we have to put in balance here. We talked about that question of that balance between how do you protect the vulnerable patient, particularly the people Schiller was talking about. They are open and very attracted by, for obvious reasons, a new treatment, a new medicine. How do you protect them? How do you ensure that efficacy and that safety? But at the same time, we don't hold back this innovation. And you're pointing there, you need rewards to do innovative research. How do we get that balance? And then how do we get that balance of cost versus benefit, which links us to our reimbursement question from earlier. So all these things coming together. Patrick, can you still hear me? Or have you disappeared? Are you out there? Let me just see. Patrick, can you hear me? So for the moment, I think we've lost him. I'm not sure if he's disappeared, or can we find out while I talk to the others? We won't see him because we've turned the cameras off, but perhaps if we could find out if he's given up on us or not. But in the meantime, I will come to you. I mean, Dorian, coming back to what you said at the beginning about, and you said everything is emerging, and this is an area full of potential but full of challenge. Why do you think that information that you were looking for is lacking? Why are we behind, if you like, in terms of addressing some of these very difficult issues, but issues that are essential to realise the full potential of these therapies? It's all, yeah.
It is possible. I do not know. I do not have the answer. People will say that there is not enough funding that goes to this work for more detailed ethics analysis and further thinking. We have different regulatory frameworks and different public opinion in the member states. Human embryonic stem cell research was a period that was not even, scientists will not say that they did research in this area. So there are many challenges that are, in addition to the scientific challenges, that might impede work in the ethics area. But that's not the important thing for me. The important thing for me is not only the work that goes there, of course, but also the timing. When do you prepare yourself for any foreseeable, let's say, regulation, framework, that might come up? What is the timing that organizations like FEAM have in order to stimulate the discussion and maybe add to the overall European discussion about where do we need to go, what do we need to do? Timing is extremely important. And I remember in the building next door where we had the meeting with FEAM on the clinical trials regulation, I was surprised of how many academies did not know the timing of the regulation, did not know when it was necessary to provide your input. When was it necessary to engage with the legal departments, with the ministries, with all the other actors? So they were coming with beautiful ideas too late in the cycle. So a lot of disappointment. So there is the question of what we can do. There is a lot of knowledge out there of what we can do. There is a lot of knowledge of how we can engage and improve the relation with the public. And sometimes, frequently, we forget that the first way that we have to communicate with the public is this old-fashioned ethics holy grail, informed consent. Do we do it correctly? How do we inform these people properly of what is expected? Sorry, of what is the contract? Informed consent is a contract of trust. You give your trust and you expect full trust in return.
Two questions. React on that if you would, Sheila, but also on this broader point, when we talk about, because we're here talking in an EU context, and you were pointing to another challenge from dealing with this or finding response to the European level, which is different local cultures, different public opinions, different attitudes to this sort of scientific work. So could you react on both those 2 points?
Absolutely. Well, trust is a really interesting word there, and it's a word we talk about a lot at Sense About Science, and people often ask us, how do we just get people to trust us? Why can't they just trust researchers? I know we weren't saying that, but some researchers come to us and say, why can't they just trust us? And we always say back to them, well, if you want to be trusted, you've got to show yourself to be trustworthy. That means you've got to be open and honest and proactive on how you communicate and engage with people. And I think it's broader than informed consent with people who might be in your research. It's engaging with groups of people who will be interested in the results of your research before you even start it. You talked about a minute ago, Giulio, about engaging with regulators as early as possible in the process is important. And I think it's engaging with the public or as early as possible in the process is vital as well. That's how you learn about the cultural context.
And how do we do that most effectively in a way that is balanced and sensible and calm?
It is doing the approach that we've always done to public engagement, and have worked with tons of groups across Europe, across the EU on this, which is just bringing into your lab or going to groups of the people who might want to use your results at the end. In many people in this room's cases, that will be particular patients with a particular condition, I imagine. It might be parents of those patients. It might be carers or groups around those patients. Bringing them in and talking to them about what you're going to do, the status of the research, the context around it, and this is really the heart of all the recommendations we have at Sense About Science, is be open and honest about the context and the status of the research, what we know already, where we are, what the potentials are, what the potential pitfalls that we might find on the way are going to be.
So if
And
we
the
are to
uncertainties.
answer some of the ethical dilemmas and questions, we have to do that as a society. We can't do it just...
You can't do it just by yourself, because we can never predict what someone is going to say. A member of the public is going to understand from what you are communicating to them, if you like, and is going to care the most about. It might not be that we cure the physical aspect of the condition. It might be something else in it.
Julia, a reaction on that? Yeah.
Yes, I want to add that, and then maybe listen to some opinion in the audience. There is one problem. I've been talking many times in association of meetings of patients with muscular dystrophy. And once there was a journalist who had a severe genetic disease, and he raised a very important point, and the point is time. We have, in the lab, have all the time in the world, not in my case because of age reasons, but, essentially, younger scientists have all the time. And to do things well, you need time. You need to do controls. You need to be sure of what you're doing before moving further. Patients do not have time, because every day the disease takes a little more of the, of their muscle or their skin or their life. And therefore, when you talk to them, you cannot just say, it will take another 20 years to get there with safety. But you cannot even promise something that you will not be able to deliver. So it's a really difficult position when you go there, and you cannot say, in a couple of years, we will start a trial with good chance of success, simply because you don't know. You could say, we plan to start a trial in X years, and we hope to get some positive result. That's the most you can say. But obviously, there is even people, parents of children I would be the same if I was a parent. I would be...
Take anything. No.
Yeah, we were discussing with a colleague whether we would be completely refractory to the announcement of these private stem cell clinics if we were, educated people, but not involved in this topic as we are.
Exactly. So it's hard enough, even at your level, to make that distinction and that decision. I'm told that Patrick is listening to us. Patrick, can you hear me?
I can certainly hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. I just wanted to ask you, Patrick, in your description of the challenges relating to clinical trials in particular, and that quality versus quantity...
Okay.
I don't think this is going to work. My instinct is we have to give up. Am I right? Yeah, okay. He was going to come, he had to cancel at the last minute. I'm sorry, Patrick, we can't hear you. It's breaking up all the time. I'm going to have to abandon it. I'm really sorry about that. Okay, I just wanted to, in terms of that balancing act, because what we don't want to do, Dorian, is in addressing these issues and making sure that what we do is safe, that it's efficacious, and that will then also lead into all the other issues we had to do with reimbursement and so on, but is hold this back. There is so much potential in this area to make such a difference in the long term. So for you, what is the key to getting that balance right between protection of patients and getting the innovations to them, rewarding that innovation? What is the key that unlocks the right balance for us, do you think?
Yeah, that's the million euro question, right? I think that from our side, from the research program, I cannot speak about the clinical work. The best thing that we have to do is enable the researchers to do the work, but support them. Because what we heard here was all the responsibilities that somehow find always the way into the laboratory. We ask researchers to be ethicists, data protection managers, artificial intelligence supremos, and intellectual property right aficionados. In many institutions, we do that with proper support. I'm afraid that this is not enough. If you want to help innovation, you have to help research, but not only on paper. You have to provide the structures and support. It's not always a question of money.
Okay.
If someone from a laboratory needs to talk to someone concerning the social impact of his or her research, he has to be able to find access to that person. If somebody wants to improve the way they talk to patients, it has to have access to this person.
So it's building those networks across disciplines.
Structures.
That's what
We are beyond networks. We need support structures. Those are also expensive. But as our economist friend will say, there is no free lunch. Right? You have to build the structures to facilitate the work of the researchers, to do the work that they are tasked to do. And then, of course, with the discussion, with the public participation, with all the shareholders, you build frameworks that support further that work.
Julia, a reaction to that, if you would, and then I'll come to you, Sheila.
I don't have much more to add. I agree that this 100 million pounds question, but
do these structures need to be? What do they need to look like? How do you build them?
This also is a difficult question. I'm always a little skeptical about structures because they tend to crystallize a lot initiative. On the other hand, without a solid structure, you have a fantastic initiative as long as the driving person is there. Then everything vanishes in 6 months. So I don't have an answer for that. I think I would like to hear someone commenting on that.
Sheila, I stopped you earlier when you wanted to give us your recommendations. You've given us a clue to them when you said what should underpin everything that you want to suggest. But as we look for the key ingredients of a policy framework that will enable us to get this balance right, what for you are the most important elements of that? What do you recommend?
Well, it's related to the discussion we were just having here about frameworks and structures and capacity and expertise in institutions. And I mean, it is that me or is that? It is true that I am also a little bit skeptical about structures and frameworks. You know what they say about frameworks? They're like toothbrushes. Everybody has one and no one wants to use anybody else's. So you don't just need the structures and the frameworks, you also need you need the push and the pull. You need people willing to use them so that they become value for money. So it's all about bringing these discussions and trainings about ethics, about research integrity issues and engagement issues so that it becomes parts of researchers' jobs. So that the early career researchers, they just do these things and have these conversations at the times they need to with the people they need to as part of their job.
So
and don't see it as an outside
that point
force.
the Dorian made when he talked at the beginning about the gaps as he saw them, and he talked about the training of researchers in this area. We need more of that. We don't do we do that now? I don't. How much is it done now?
I'm not the person to ask.
You don't know.
No, I don't know.
Yeah,
If I may, this is the Lancet Commission, right? This is published in 2018, but the work was done before.
Right.
Look at one of the key messages. Now, we are talking 2018, right? 21st century. What's the problem that we have in this area? Hampered by reduced funding, okay, for the best quality basic research, frequent absence of strong preclinical evidence, poor trial design. I mean, look at the problems that we have. Before we are able to go and learn how to build correct regulatory frameworks, from the research perspective, you have a 2018 report that talks about poor clinical design. We're supposed to be experts in that, right? Supposed to be almost automatic. You press a button, your sample comes out, everything comes out, ideally. Poor, inconsistent reporting. Now, we have, research 101 issues. When I talk about structures, I'm talking about this. It's not only the committees. Our clinical doctors learn clinical work in the hospital. This is the challenge that we have.
Julia, you want to react?
Yes. Sometimes the clinical trial design is poor not because the clinician scientists are particularly stupid, as could be my case, for example, but because you have a very limited patient population.
Point Patrick was making.
For ethical reason, you cannot have controls. Very often, the phenotypical variation of the disease among the population are huge. Sometimes there was a family with two brothers with identical mutation. One went on the wheelchair age 8 and the other was walking at 14. So if you would have used the 14 as the subject of your trial, we had in our trial in Milan one patient who continued to walk up to 16, 17, but he had no trace of our cells, of the cell transplanted. He would have continued even without transplantation. So under this condition, of course the design is poor when you do it at best. Now, if you do for commercial reason, it's another ball game. For what the report, that is, again, we reported, the result of our trial in a publication in 2015, and we said, it didn't work, bottom line. Again, a company cannot say it didn't work. Must say there was a small beneficial effect that will need to be further improved, which is the same thing said in another way, okay? So the reporting sometimes, it's not that I want to justify, but is dictated by the need to keep playing. If you say, I've lost this match, I need another match, for me it's been very difficult to raise additional funds after that paper.
Was Patrick in the right area then when he said, because of this quantity problem, therefore it is the emphasis on that quality, but also very early on, so the data you're collecting, you have to be looking for everything that you could possibly, he was indicating, again, early stage is part of the solution to a problem we can't avoid. I thought I understood him say.
Let me just say, then I'll shut up. Trials for congenital immune deficiency were done in London, in Milan, in Paris, just to limit to Europe. All the treated patients regain an immune competence. They went back to a normal life. The product got marketing authorization as Trimvelis. In that case, you don't need statistics. All the patients treated now have immune defense. Game over, finish, no discussion. But that's the extreme case, the exception. The rule is you have a very small benefit. Now you tell me what you do next. If you say the benefit was too small to justify moving towards requesting marketing authorization, in a certain sense you are dead. And therefore you are forced to see the glass half full and not half empty.
I want to go out to the room and then come back on what all this means for you as policymakers, for regulators, and so on in a moment. But first, I just wanted to see if anybody has a comment. There's a lot of expertise in this room. I'd like to hear it. Or indeed a question for our panel. Please, I know many of you know each other, but for my sake, introduce yourself.
I'm Françoise Meunier, the Vice President of FEAM and former Director General of EORTC. I have been involved for 30 years in pan-European research, and I am very much intrigued by the comments of Mr. Karatsas about framework and infrastructure and what?
Is this one not working either? You're having one of those days.
I can speak. Don't you understand what I'm saying? Okay.
Loud as you can. Sorry, we're having challenges.
I was intrigued by your comments about framework and structure, because for 30 years I have gone through 4th framework program, 5th framework program, you name it, all of them. And the difficulty was that you create a network, and indeed after 4 years the network is dissolved and you start all over again and recreate network. Now I hear the word about structure. And I will give you a specific example. UNETA. We are discussing the cost of drugs, the high cost, and then the fact that every single country, when EMA, the agency, is giving authorization, implementation, every country do the exercise of cost and reimbursement, and yes, no, with considerable delay. 4 which is the European Network for Health Technology Assessment. I fully agree that healthcare budget is a national matter and it's up to the country to decide. But assessment of values, of effectiveness is the same. I don't see why every country has to do the assessment. Yes, for the cost.
Okay.
So UNETA is going to be finished in 2020. What's going on? Is there going to be a future for
Okay, I'm going to
UNETA?
stop you there because we need lots of issues to discuss. Dory, can you pick on that? Can you help us all?
No, I cannot help. I mean,
Mary.
straight down the street is the European Parliament.
Yeah.
No. If you move your head like this, it means that you are giving up. You should not give up. I mean, you remember the regulation. Remember how the regulation was built, how difficult it was, and who was present and who was absent. Our participatory process as citizens is not only as patients, right? It's also as citizens. And we have mechanisms. You have to be there at the right time with the right way, volume.
On this issue of short-termism, so something is funded, you get to the end of a budgeting cycle, it stops being funded. So you build structures, you said it gone beyond networks, but you build network structures, things, and then it stops because the funding runs out. In areas like this where it's so important to keep that collaboration going, is there now, as we look to the future and Horizon Europe, is this something that's been looked at? Because it's something I hear in a lot of debates I do in relation to research and innovation. It's going great, you set a great basis, and then the funding ends just at the key moment. Is this something that you can be...
I hear exactly the other criticism, that we keep funding the same and the same. So, you know, there must be a balance somewhere. Voila.
Okay.
I'll take the middle road.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Yes, thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is John Butler. I'm here for a pharmaceutical company, but I will not name it because I want to be taken as a citizen and as a scientist. This was a very European discussion. Yeah, well, yeah, but you got the hidden need. We are talking about breakthrough therapies for patients in need and desperate. And the first thing that we talk about, no offense, is ethics. And I welcome your comment. It has to be taken out from the helicopter view down to the day-to-day operation. And I look forward to talking to you in the past. Then we talk about misuse. I know people personally, personal friends, that have been ripped off in very reputable clinics, private clinics in Germany, that offer dendritic cell vaccination, on a n=1 basis for 70,000 euros on proven therapy. But what I want to talk about is what we haven't talked about here. We have built a regulation boulder, a wall that is hampering innovation in Europe. Europe used to be a leading, what is it? A leading.
Okay, but yeah, but it's not a speech.
English is not
It's
my mother language.
we don't make speeches from the floor. We just make a point.
Okay,
Please.
the point I want to make, we are falling behind. I was last week in Israel, and you should see how they approach these issues. I was yesterday in the university.
Okay, it's
of
turning
our
into a
president
speech
here.
again. So I'm really sorry,
Okay.
sir, but we need to discuss the point you're raising. My question to you is, if we are to get this right, and going back to what Patrick talked about, for example, he said, in this area, we accept we won't get the quantity on the trials, and we will approve things without knowing as much as we did. That presumably is their way of saying, so we don't hamper innovation. Where do you think they're going wrong? Because it seems they're moving in the right direction with those sorts of calculations. Briefly, if you would, where are they going wrong?
In a word, I heard something about we have to accept that this will take longer. No, look at what the FDA is doing. Be a little bit more aggressive. Be a little bit more self-critical. Are we putting the importance where the importance should be? I welcome your statement, Professor Koso, at the end. These are desperate patients. We cannot go by ticking the boxes as if this was a product for 100,000 patients. This is not the case, and we're not questioning that.
Okay, thank you very much. And sorry to be brutal, but we do need lots of issues to discuss. And I want to come back in terms of, okay, the implications of all this. So we're hearing a mixture here. We're hearing we are doing things to make sure we don't stifle the innovation. We are accepting different standards for clinical trials, etc. And then we hear, no, we're not. Look at what others are doing. Look at what the US is doing. We're going to get left behind. How do you see that balance and working in this area? Do you fear, Julio, that you, in the work that you do, will be left behind and it's to do with our regulatory system, or what's your feeling?
I think we are between a rock and a hard place. I learned this English.
Very good.
Because obviously any regulation requires to be dealt with, requires pages and pages to be written, to be discussed, to be approved, to be returned, to be resent, and so on and so forth. But if we eliminate everything, now where is the difference between Harvard Medical School and the private clinic somewhere in the world? Okay, so it's a matter of balance, and sometimes this balance is very difficult to find. So we cannot say we want to proceed without regulations because regulation can be seen as strangulations, because this way we are no different from the private sector. On the other hand, there are things that could be where, for example, I have noticed in my experience in different countries that most of the regulators were formed on clinical trials which were done 100% with drugs. And so they have a good chemical background. They reason as they would reason with the drug, and they cannot ask the chemical composition of a cell, because it's like asking the chemical composition of God.
So they don't have the skills that we need to evaluate these.
They would need to be, not all.
No. But we are lacking.
We probably would be needed to create a new generation of regulators who have a strong background in cell and molecular biology and possibly in virology. I cannot be asked whether the lentiviral vector may cause AIDS. I cannot be by a person who's in charge of deciding whether I could do it or not.
So it's interesting here because we talked earlier about the researchers need some training to understand some of the issues that they face, and both you and Sheila made that point very clearly. And on the other side, we need the training on the regulator side to make sure they understand what they're dealing with, and it's different. Sheila, for you, as we look, trying to build this picture of the key ingredients of getting this balance right, what's your reaction to what you're hearing here in the debate? So we have stifles innovation, we're just not doing it, versus your concern, the vulnerable person who is open to abuse.
Yeah, I mean, the issues around arguments that regulation is stifling innovation, and on the other side, worries about poor design and poor reporting, for example, as you highlighted there. These are not unique to the field of regenerative medicine, obviously, by any means. But I think what is unique about the field of regenerative medicine, and which makes them maybe sort of sharper edge when we're talking about it, is this public, vulnerable public piece, and that gap that Julio's commission recognise as well between the massive potential and excitement about regenerative medicine and the reality where, it's not massively out of the lab yet, that gap. And I think that's where the risk lies if we don't start sort of rationalising that or closing that or talking about that a bit more openly and, contextualising where we are on the research and different pieces, that we risk, disappointment broadly across the public and public backlash potentially against regenerative medicine. And if there's a backlash against it, then we lose the social license, what we call the social license to run this research, as in governments will be less likely or will be less eager to fund it because the public will be against it, people will be less eager to volunteer for clinical trials, etc. So it's looking at how we can explain, be open about it and rationalise this, why this gap between expectation and reality is happening. And all of these pieces that we're talking about are pieces of it. So everything we do really comes down to urging everybody's involved in every piece of this to do more to equip the public with the knowledge and the expertise you have about why that gap exists.
Can I ask about another gap, which is we're talking about from the lab to the market and getting the regulatory approval. Then there is the gap from the market to the patient, and how we bridge that gap. And that brings us to issues about reimbursement and all of those things. How do you think at the moment we have, this is obviously a difficult issue, and we have different, I mean, one of the differences between us and the States is national health services, health fundamentally, and national competence. So once you've got the regulatory approval, which is done at European level, then you come down. How do you think we are ready to deal with this issue in terms of going from market to patient? Sheila?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how to answer how ready we are to deal with it. Only by trying to start talking more about it, I think, publicly, and seeing what kind of response we get from public and policymakers. Like, we've never encountered an area of research or a particular piece of research that hasn't been improved by the researchers going out there and literally talking to people about it. Improved in design, in communications at the end.
But I'm talking about the next
sharing.
stage. So I'm saying we've got it, but then we get into the cost-benefit analysis, and we get, okay, too expensive. We're not going to make this a reimbursable cost. And then Giulio comes and says, yeah, but hang on, in this case, the benefit is quite significant. If we cure instead of long-term treatment, you make a long-term saving. So there's a whole debate. Giulio?
Yeah, there have been studies where it has been calculated that a single intervention that leads to a definitive cure with no other needs, at the end of the day, is not paying for diseases like lysosomal storage disease that lead the patient to death in the first years of life. But for diseases like Duchenne muscular dystrophy, cystic fibrosis, hemophilia, where the bills for the health system are astronomical, then there would be a real saving. Then it becomes a matter of simply, you need all the money now, you don't spread over 40 years. But that's another issue.
But you have an upfront cost, yeah.
But that's why the real thing is, are you really eradicating the disease from this patient? And then, but even so, what we have seen with Strimvelis is really worrying, because, GSK had offered a price, I think, initially of 700, then reduced to even reduced, and it was deemed to be too expensive. And then, if one is cynical, would say it was considered too expensive because the children otherwise die within 2 years of life.
The cost to the health service.
Whereas if it was cystic fibrosis, probably it would have been convenient. Now, it's horrible to talk about, life in numbers, but one has to face, and I still don't understand.
But those are the sort of calculations that health services make.
Yeah, I understand Glybera because it was 1 million, but I really never understood why Strimvelis.
This does bring us back. It is an ethical issue, is it not, Dorian?
It's an ethical issue, but it's a societal ethical issue. It's not only a research ethical issue, because these policies are designed by governments, and governments are elected. So when you choose what kind of government you have, you also elect the policy that they're going to implement in public health, in education, and everything.
But Giulio is pointing to something more granular than something so that debate about, well, in this case, they're not going to live that long anyway, versus... But you also talked about the margin of benefit, so a small improvement or a big improvement, and where the line is. At that level of improvement, we'll pay for it. At that level, we won't. I mean, I think my point really is we may not have the answers now, but is this a debate that health services, in your experience and from your knowledge of this, are having? And so we're ready to make the decisions as these treatments come online? Or are we really right at the... I mean, we've had it in other areas of medicine, but in this area where the initial cost can be very high, are we there?
All I've witnessed is a great confusion.
Yeah?
If I'm not nice. No, I'm nice, but I'm not nice.
Not nice always.
Not always nice. I would have thought twice before approving a treatment that costs, I think, £300,000 per year per patient and results in an improvement of ambulation of about 7 to 8% over the baseline, whereas a healthy child is above, far, far above. And I don't understand why Strimvelis was not approved. There are contradictions that largely escape my understanding.
And Sheila, I mean, from a patient perspective, these are contradictions that largely will escape their understanding because they are not easy to explain. How do do you see, I mean, can we involve patients more in this discussion, or is it impossible? Because obviously, if it's them and it affects them, this sounds a very brutal
Well, I mean,
conversation.
it is brutal, and it's frustrating, I think, if you're just on the other side of that line and you don't get
Very
it.
much.
But these things are easy, in many ways, are easy to explain, in that you can sit down with someone who is very, very interested in the outcome and work through the calculations with them, and they'll understand it. The thing is, these are political decisions, as Dorian just said. These are decisions that are made at some level by governments. So, I mean, yeah, what else can you do but empower patients to vote in the kind of governments they want? And I'm not sure I would personally be advocating for, you know, any particular patient group to vote for any particular politician, because they will go easier on, you know, they will be more lenient with or more liberal with, you know, the outcomes and whatever. But, I mean, that's the reality.
So, in terms of where we go from here, we have some guidelines, and they were developed. I mean, DG, the Commission, and EMA have developed guidelines. They're working on more. You're all working on these issues. You appealed for much more from here. You said, we'll take it up. You do the work. We will take it up for you, and we will make it work for you. Where do we go from here in terms of addressing some of these issues, acknowledging that some are very difficult to resolve? What, for you, do you think is the way forward to begin to untie some of these knots? You want to come in? Please do. Hang on, where did I put my hand down? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, George, and
That'd
then
be
I'll
good.
come to you.
That's-
Thank you, George.
Let's have someone.
I mean, we're really getting into the heart of discussion now, aren't we? Some words that I've heard have been really crucial. Enabling. Once. We should be enabling rather than stopping, but we should be able to be critical to know which is the right way to go. And I'm an enabler, not a manager. And Commissioner Moydas, I spoke with him about this once and said, you are an enabler, you are not a manager. And that is a crucial thing. Second word that I heard, which we need to think about, is risk. And that's only been mentioned once. Patients can decide if they wish to have a treatment when they have had risk explained. Now, we will be hearing about hematological stem cell transplants. There is a risk in that. You have a lifetime ahead of you with a successful transplant. You may be dead in 3 months. And that risk is the patient's risk, actually. And that has to be explained clearly and properly. Even though the ethics have been explained for experiment, we know that this can work, but there still is risk, and that must be explained.
And then the patient has the choice. Can I just ask, George, sorry, to clarify, when you say we are enablers, it's not managers, what for you, what does that mean in practical terms? That you should not get involved in this conversation? You should... What does it mean?
It means that rather than saying, you cannot do this, it means you are saying, I wish to discuss with you how we can make this better,
Right.
to enable you to proceed, because we think this is a very good idea.
Right.
And at the end of that enabling, you may say, actually, together, this isn't right. We haven't got it right. But there is a fundamental difference between managing and enabling. And what we've heard is some managers actually don't quite understand what they're managing these days. And certainly in the UK, that's what we see.
Yeah.
People in all sorts of industries with a financial background, but not a practical background of what they're managing.
Absolutely. Did you want to come in there? Please do.
Come in there about informed consent, which obviously was mentioned earlier, and this how you describe risk to a patient. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more later, but the last 2 trials in regenerative medicine that I've had come through my door to look at for offering to patients had information leaflets for the patients of between 50 and 100 pages. How can you possibly expect somebody to read all of that when they're often feeling unwell and actually give informed consent?
And was
from
that, was your feeling that was designed to bamboozle, or simply a failure of effort to simplify it?
I think it's. I don't think it's designed to bamboozle. I think it is a misunderstanding
What consent?
from industry.
Of what
these
informed
industry
means,
clients,
of what informed
rather
means.
what they need to
Yeah.
be putting
So what
into
information constitutes informed consent?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we were talking about risk. These are often treatments where we don't know what the risks are. You know, CAR T cells now we're giving as a licensed product. We don't know if we're storing up all these patients for 5 years' time who've developed a new side effect that we don't know about now, which we can't possibly consent for at the beginning.
So but for you that still means we don't say therefore we shouldn't approve it and we shouldn't do it. We just have to tell the patient that we don't know. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. We have to be able to accept that
A
there
level of
is
unknown.
a level of unknown and a level of risk involved with all of these therapies. But if you have something that takes a patient from dying within 3 months to living for 5 years to get that side effect, that may actually be a good outcome.
As long as they knew what they were signing up for, as it were. Thank you very much. We'll hear from you later, James. Please, Graziella, who we're also going to hear from later.
I mean, my comments was related to the point of the cost. I mean, the cost of the healthcare and of treatment. I mean, I believe that I'm quite not diplomatic. So I believe that probably many people have to learn how to calculate, I mean, the real cost of the treatment and the advantage for the different member states, since they are cutting a lot of cost, as Julia was mentioning, and as everybody can highlight, but there is an increase in the healthcare cost anyway. So probably something is not properly working. The point is that, I mean, nobody calculate enough and evaluate very well, and this could be the role of charities, for example, the cost of patients as they are. If we don't cure the patient, how much they cost to the society, how much they cost to the healthcare. And this is something that should be, let's say, diffused, spread around, because most of the time the people calculate the cost of the therapy, and they do not calculate how much it costs the pathology all over the time, despite the people which is dying immediately, which becomes an ethical issue. So probably the role of the patient and charities could be to make the people aware of the cost of patients, because the political decisions are often driven by the reaction of publics. And if the public is conscious about the cost of some kind of pathology, can trigger some kind of decision, political decision, in the direction of paying the therapy, which are a way to save money, not a way to spend money, in many cases.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? Another speaker we're going to hear from later.
I have one comment and one question for you. The comment is about the small effect. Take care that sometimes or every time when we start with something new, human, the first step is for small effect. If I think about the transplant field, for example, that was the first tentative of regenerative medicine, or in some ways substitution function. If we look at the first years of kidney transplant, heart transplant, was a disaster in terms of effect. Okay? But this was the basis to go forward to a better and better and better situation. So we have to learn a lot from small effect and transfer this in a more efficient form. The second was about the question. I'm suffering personally in this time about the competition outside of Europe. Okay? So we have a region in the world in which the regulatory bodies, the ethics are with different vision. And the risk that we have now is that many knowledge and investment can go in this part of the world. I'm speaking about China, Asia in general. And this could be a problem in the next future, because this can be really a competitor, not only in terms of money, but also knowledge. And we could be outside of the field in some part of the story in the next years. So how do you think about this? How we can manage this type of problem?
Thank you. Dorian first on that point, if you would.
I have here in front of me a part from the Institute of Stem Cell and Regeneration of the Chinese Academy. Yes, they're spending enormous amount of money. Their biggest problem now is public reaction. So right now, they will spend a lot of money to build their ethics structure. They do not understand the ethics that we are, the way we understand. So as a person working in ethics, I'm not an ethicist, as a person working in ethics, what I'm saying is that we are going to teach our competition to do the things the right way. They will take time, but soon enough, because of the public reaction, they will see that in order to spend the money correctly, they have to do exactly the same things as we do with all the challenges that we have. But it's not that there, it's an open field for anybody to go and do whatever they like. Maybe, but they are changing very fast. They put ethics and research integrity as one of the items of the EU-China, they meaning the Chinese, EU-China dialogue, up there with air transport and intellectual property rights. Because they realize if they don't start it correctly, they will lose competition. Because I would like to see a pharmaceutical company going and doing work in China with no regulatory framework and importing the medicine back to Europe. So they know that in the long run they're going to lose.
I'll answer I think the example you gave, it wasn't that of a small effect. Relates to the fact that in the past, not only organ transplantation, but also bone marrow transplantation started with a rate of adverse events so severe that today they would have never been able to progress further, which is something we should think about. For what concerns the small effect, I fully agree with you. It's just a matter of money. There was a question there. Wait. Microphone.
Jacqueline White from GSK. I think we should really take the comment about the competition outside Europe as a really an important one. We always say that the standard in China will never cross the barrier of Europe and the US. And you probably have seen recently that there has been a drug developed by China that has been registered in the US, which has a regulation which is quite high. So I do believe we have to take into account this competition which is coming. We need to learn the basic of the risk assessment that has been very strong in Europe and FDA, and take those principles to be able to implement them in an area where benefit should be the priority for patients, and put the regulations in area where we have been very strong in quality. What are the minimum requirements we need to make sure that what we inject to patients has been of good quality? Put back all those efforts that has been done the last decades in a context where we have emerging therapy innovation that can save life.
Thank you very much indeed. George, you want to come back in?
Really, I come to the importance of research, clarity of thought, and good protocols. Another mode of treatment which was incredibly difficult at the beginning and could have easily been stopped. Cardiac surgery at the Mayo Clinic. 5 children admitted every Sunday for cardiac surgery. By Friday, 5 children were dead. And this was week after week until they realized it was the cardiac bypass machine that was the important thing to stop clotting. As soon as they got that right, by thought and clarity of thought, cardiac surgery really took off.
But if we'd stopped it at that point, they never would have made that leap.
Well, so that's where research and science and clear thought is important. Across a team, to the ethicists, is it justifiable to bring these children in and say to the parents, your child may well be dead on Friday, but they may well be dead in 2 weeks' time?
They do it all the time?
Absolutely.
And the missing ingredient is there. They may be dead on Friday, but we will have learned something. And we will be a step closer to helping a child like them 6 months down the road.
One Friday,
and
they
that
won't all be
matters
dead,
to the patients who volunteer for clinical trials, knowing it may or may
So
not benefit
again, going
them,
back to
but it will
James's
help
point,
someone.
you told the parents, you were clear, you made that choice clear to them, then they have a right to make that choice. Yeah. Okay, brief one if you would, because we need to draw conclusions.
I was just going to say with that, the importance is picking up that all those children were dying each week and looking at it, systematic
To find
way
out
to
why.
find out the problem. And we recently saw at Great Ormond Street in the UK that they weren't monitoring how they were freezing their stem cells, and they were having lots of failed engraftments. No one picked up on it for far too long because there wasn't proper monitoring.
So is one of the scientific challenges to develop the monitoring, and we perhaps neglect that because it's not the sexy bit.
And I think that comes back to Patrick's point. These are small number of trials.
Yeah.
We have to get the post-marketing authorization monitoring, the reporting of events right. How often do people have the black triangle system and actually properly report the side effects of
Thank you very much. Okay, we are almost out of time before our coffee break. You will be very welcome to join in the debate from the other side of the room. As our second panel have joined in your debate, I'd love it if you joined in theirs. But I just want to try and identify some key next steps. So where do we go from here? Because we've identified a number of very difficult issues. And for each of you, this is not a nut we're going to crack all at the same time. But if we are to make a start, what for you is the key next thing to do? We've had somebody saying, hang on, you started, you were talking ethics, and you weren't talking fostering innovation, what we need to do to make sure that we stay ahead of the race, we don't get beat. No, I'm simplifying. But which do we put first? So are we at risk of, that's my point really. Where would you, as a key next step, what is your top priority to make sure that we can meet these challenges that we've been talking about, but also realise these huge, enormous benefits, this revolution in modern medicine that people have talked about in this area? Giulio, for you, where do we focus first? What's the top priority?
As usual, I don't know. So I would say we have to fight on all the different, we cannot forget about something. We have to keep in mind the ethical aspect, we have to keep in mind innovation and how to support, regulation, patient involvement, all this has to come at the same time. And that's why, sometimes, I don't know, the European Commission and EMA don't talk enough. And there's also one other practical problem. The actual grant that you get from the European Commission can pay for a phase 1, but no more than that. So academics are essentially limited to a phase 1 to A. They cannot move farther down the line simply because the amount of money exceeds, it has to come from industry. So that is, but industry may have different agenda from the old professor.
But if on your first point I can turn that into a key next step then, if we need to make sure that we are taking account of all these factors at once, it is that key next step is, as we at the start of a new commission and a new 5-year cycle, it is we need to break down the silos between commission departments, agencies and so on. We need to make sure everyone is working together because otherwise we can't. Yeah. So that would be a first step is let's get the joined up thinking working and then we can tackle all these things in tandem. Would that be a fair turning around of your answer? In
an ideal world, yes. Then you have to see where all the interests of the stakeholders coincide or not. Otherwise, there could be problems.
Absolutely. But if you don't start from we need to do this, you're not going to get there. Sheila?
I would say communication as well in a slightly maybe narrower, more targeted way. I'd urge you all to do more to explain those fascinating issues that we all talked through just now around quality and uncertainty and risk in this field, and to do more to equip the public to understand those. Being aware that you don't switch your brain off and do what, I'm sorry, I'm pointing at you, don't mean you switch your brain off. You don't switch your brain off like the person who put together that 100-page patient information leaflet did, where they blindly followed the rules about the kind of information they needed to communicate to the member of the public without actually switching their brain back on again and thinking what's actually useful here. So doing things like joining in the pieces of research that are happening right now, and I think some academies are involved in them, on testing patient information leaflets and seeing what are the key pieces of information that leave people feeling they are genuinely informed or not at the end. And I don't think regenerative medicine is part of that discussion yet, so maybe looping into that.
And then some guidelines for in an area where the informed part of informed consent is going to be so terribly important, are there guidelines that can be developed for this area to make sure that sort of thing doesn't happen in future?
Right.
That for you would be a key next
Yeah.
step. And for you, Dorian, as we start we have a new European Commission today, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
Finally went through the Parliament. So we are genuinely now, I can say, at the beginning of a
Day
5-year
one.
cycle. Your key priority, your key next step.
Professional organizations like yours have to help us build a framework that we can enable our researchers to do the right thing all the time.
So,
Which is difficult.
Yes, exactly. So you are enablers, he wants more help and to enable them to do the right thing. I'm sure we'll come back on all these issues in our next session, but will you join me in thanking our first panel and Patrick in absentia, who did his best. Thank him very much indeed. Thank you so much.